Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of your sources and really try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge or insight. Have you ever wondered if your body is maybe secretly working against your weight loss goals? Today we're diving into a truly fascinating and pretty radical new perspective on obesity. It's one that challenges the traditional view that, it's solely about calories in, calories out.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
We're going to explore the surprising science behind why we actually gain weight. It's based on Dr. Richard Johnson's groundbreaking work and this idea he's put forward that nature wants us to be fat. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack how our ancient biology, clashes with modern life, and crucially, what we can maybe do to find a bit more health and harmony.
Okay, let's really get into this then.
Yeah.
When you say nature wants us to be fat, that sounds pretty counterintuitive, right?
It does initially.
The idea that for most of history, nature actually saw fat as a good thing. Can you help us understand that?
Absolutely, yeah. From nature's perspective, fat isn't the enemy, it's a lifesaver. Think of it as a critical energy reserve, and actually a water reserve, too. It allows animals to survive things like deadly winters or droughts or those really long migrations.
Okay.
Take the bar-tailed godwit, for example. It's the seashore bird. It builds up huge fat stores before migration and, well, it's been documented flying 7,000 miles, nonstop.
Wow.
An 8-day flight from Alaska to New Zealand fueled entirely by that fat.
Incredible.
Or think about the European garden warbler. It only risks crossing the Sahara Desert once it has enough fat packed on.
So fat is literally a superpower in the wild. It's essential for survival.
Yeah.
How does this translate to us then, to humans? Does it mean being maybe a bit heavier might have actually been an advantage for our ancestors?
It absolutely does, yeah. Consider the tale of two fasts, as Dr. Johnson puts it. Mahatma Gandhi, had minimal body fat. He nearly died after just 5 days of fasting.
Right.
In really stark contrast, there was a man named Angus Barbieri. He weighed over 450 pounds. He fasted for 382 days as an outpatient.
382 days.
Yep, lost 275 pounds. And remarkably, without developing any serious symptoms, his immense fat stores just provided all the fuel his body needed.
That's astonishing.
Or, think of a bodybuilder who got pneumonia. With almost no fat to burn, his body started breaking down critical muscle. That led to severe illness, whereas even a little bit of fat would have spared that muscle, helped him recover more easily.
That's a really powerful contrast.
Yeah.
It definitely challenges our modern perception of fat. So if even being, say, a little heavy was an advantage historically,
Yeah.
what does that mean for how we think about a healthy weight today?
Precisely. And it's interesting because modern studies actually show that being mildly overweight, specifically a BMI around 27, is associated with improved survival.
Really?
Yes, for people at risk, for severe illness, for the elderly, and potentially even for the general population. It just underscores that fat can be a key protection when food is unavailable or when the body is under extreme stress.
That's fascinating. So, okay, if fat is this necessary superpower, how does nature actually do that? How does it tell the body, okay, time to store fat for the lean times? This sounds like where Dr. Johnson's survival switch comes in. What is this switch? How does it actually get activated?
Right, the survival switch. It's a biological process that gets triggered when your body senses an energy crisis. It's basically mimicking starvation or dehydration.
Okay.
When it's flipped on, animals and us, we become excessively hungry. We forage intensely. Our resting energy expenditure actually goes down. We burn fewer calories just existing. And we maximize fat accumulation. We increase fat production and we burn less of it. We also become insulin resistant. That's to ensure glucose is available for the brain. It's essentially like flighting a low power mode for survival, designed for times of true scarcity.
Got it. Low power mode. And what's the specific signal, the key ingredient that flips this switch in our bodies?
Well, the primary trigger appears to be fructose, specifically fructose. When it's metabolized by a special enzyme, fructokinase, it actually consumes ATP. ATP is your body's immediate energy currency, right?
Right, the energy molecule.
Exactly. So metabolizing fructose causes a rapid drop in those cellular energy levels. This energy depletion pathway, as it's called, it mimics a starvation signal, instantly triggers the survival switch.
Wow.
And this process also generates uric acid.
Uric acid. I've heard of that in relation to gout.
Exactly. And here, it acts like grit in the gears of our cells. It contributes to what's called oxidative stress. You can think of it like rust in our energy factories, the mitochondria. And critically, it directly blocks your body from burning fat.
Okay, so fructose flips the switch, generates uric acid, stops fat burning. Can you give us a vivid picture of this playing out in nature? Like, what animals intentionally use this to get fat?
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Think of bears in the fall.
Okay.
They dramatically increase their food intake, sometimes up to 20,000 calories a day.
20,000.
Yep. Gaining 8 to 10 pounds daily. And one of their favorite foods, fruit. They eat enormous amounts, especially as it ripens and that sugar content skyrockets.
Right, makes sense.
Or the fat-tailed dwarf lemur in Madagascar. It eats huge amounts of fruit in the wet season. Why? To store fat in its tail before it goes into estivation, like hibernation, but for summer, for 6 months during droughts.
Oh, wow, fat in its tail.
Yeah, and migrating birds, too. They often switch from eating insects to eating fruit in the autumn, drastically increasing their calorie intake and their fat stores for the journey. These animals aren't just getting fat by accident, they're using fructose intentionally to activate their survival switch and prepare for lean times.
It sounds like this perfectly adapted survival mechanism is now actively working against us in our modern world.
Precisely.
Our thrifty genome, as they call it, designed for scarcity. It just seems ill-suited for a world of constant abundance. How did we get so sensitive to fructose, and how did this lead to today's obesity epidemic?
Our history is absolutely key here. You mentioned the thrifty genome. Then came the agricultural revolution, starting around 14 to 17,000 years ago. That rapidly shifted our diet towards carbohydrate-rich crops.
Why? Grains, starches.
Exactly. Our genetics, still basically prepared for food scarcity, started storing fat with this new abundance. In essence, like Dr. Johnson says, we're constantly preparing for a winter that never actually comes.
Huh. A winter that never comes.
Yeah. As Yuval Noah Harari noted in *Sapiens*, our very affluence, our success, makes it hard for us to appreciate this fundamental mismatch.
And speaking of history, you mentioned earlier you dug up some really fascinating clues from like deep human history that illustrate this point. Those Ice Age figurines.
Indeed. Yeah, figurines of naked women, often overweight or pregnant, found from the last Ice Age around 38,000 years ago.
A time of starvation.
Exactly, a time when humans were literally starving.
Yep.
These might have been symbols of survival and fertility. Research suggests they were actually depicted as fatter when they were made during colder climates or closer to glaciers. And this idea, of fatness being attractive because it's linked to fertility and health, it carried on. You see it in observations from the 1850s, like John Speke's descriptions of royal wives in Africa. Or think of Peter Paul Rubens' paintings, those voluptuous women painted during times of famine and plague in Europe.
So cultural ideas about beauty are kind of deeply intertwined with survival signals.
Mm-hmm.
And if that wasn't enough, we also had specific genetic changes, didn't we? That made us even more susceptible to this fructose effect, like nature doubled down.
Exactly. It seems we narrowly escaped extinction, not once, but twice, largely thanks to mutations that made us better at storing fat from fructose.
Twice.
First, around 65 million years ago, after the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs, a mutation in our primate ancestors knocked out their ability to make vitamin C.
Vitamin C, how does that relate?
Well, vitamin C is an antioxidant, and it can actually hinder fat production to some extent. So losing the ability to make it paradoxically enhance fructose's fat-storing effects, a survival advantage during prolonged food scarcity back then?
But a disadvantage now.
Precisely. Today, it makes us more susceptible, and many studies confirm that people who are overweight often have low vitamin C levels.
Okay, that's one mutation. What was the second?
Around 17 million years ago, during a period of climate cooling in Europe, our ape ancestors faced fruit scarcity. Another mutation arose that led to higher uric acid levels from fructose metabolism.
Ah, uric acid again.
Yep. And as we learned, higher uric acid enhances fat formation from fruit. Again, a life-saving adaptation at the time.
And there was a third one related to alcohol.
Yes, about 10 million years ago, a mutation increased our ability to metabolize alcohol 40-fold, 40 times. This likely allowed our ancestors to eat fermenting fruit that had fallen to the ground.
Another food source during scarcity.
Exactly. And it provided another source of fructose through something called the polyol pathway. This is fascinating because your body, when it senses dehydration, which alcohol can cause, can actually make fructose internally.
So you don't even need to eat sugar. Your body can make its own fructose.
Under certain conditions, like dehydration or high glucose, yes, it directly activates the survival switch, even without eating sugary foods. And even the agricultural revolution brought another mutation, around 10 to 12,000 years ago. It increased our salivary amylase production, that's the enzyme that starts breaking down starch in your mouth, made high-starch foods easier to digest, taste better, and increased our glucose intake.
Wow. So these were truly thrifty genes. They saved us multiple times. But now, in this world of, endless snacks and sugary drinks, they're causing massive problems.
Hmm.
When did this problem really start to explode? When did it become a widespread epidemic?
The major tipping point, the real acceleration for the modern obesity and diabetes epidemics, seems to be around the time of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair.
Okay, late 19th century. Why then?
It wasn't just about technological advancements, though those played a role. It was the newfound affordability and just the sheer availability of sugar. We have data from England showing per capita sugar consumption rising fivefold in a single century.
5 times.
Yes, reaching an astonishing 90 pounds per person per year by 1900. And of course, soft drinks like Coca-Cola were introduced right around then, too.
90 pounds of sugar per person. That's hard to even imagine. And the story of the island of Nauru, that's a really powerful, almost chilling illustration of the shift, isn't it?
It absolutely is a stark example. In the early 1900s, the Nauruans became incredibly wealthy from phosphate mining on their island. Their diet changed dramatically. Reports suggest many were eating a pound of sugar per day.
A pound a day.
Per day. And by the late 1920s, diabetes and obesity rates just exploded. Today, something like over 90% of Nauruans are overweight or obese. It truly illustrates the devastating power of this environmental change, primarily driven by sugar availability on our ancient biology.
So the implications of this survival switch being constantly on, far beyond just weight gain, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of the most surprising or impactful modern diseases you're seeing linked to this constant activation?
Yeah, what's truly eye-opening is how many of the chronic, non-communicable diseases that just crowd our hospitals today. Things like diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, heart disease, fatty liver disease, even certain cancers. They all show a parallel rise with sugar intake over the last century or so. And they appear to be driven, at least in large part, by this underlying mechanism, the chronically activated survival switch.
Great. Let's maybe touch on a couple of specific examples. You mentioned gout earlier.
Yes, gout. That painful arthritis caused by high uric acid crystals in the joints. It's really the poster child for chronic switch activation. Consider this. 3/4 of gout patients also have high blood pressure. Over half are obese. A quarter have type 2 diabetes.
Wow, those are high correlations.
Very high. And often, the high uric acid precedes the development of these other conditions. It suggests it's not just a symptom, but maybe a central player, a driver.
That makes sense, given what we heard about uric acid blocking fat burning and causing stress. But what about type 2 diabetes? For years, we've heard it's primarily about lifestyle choices, calories, maybe insulin resistance from just being overweight. How does this survival switch theory offer a different or maybe a deeper understanding?
Well, it suggests that type 2 diabetes might be an endgame of the insulin resistance that's directly linked to fructose metabolism. Fructose metabolism, remember, depletes ATP and generates that uric acid and oxidative stress. This process can even damage the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas over time.
So it's not just the calories and sugar, it's the fructose component, specifically driving the insulin resistance.
That's the core of the argument, yes. And historically, physicians noticed this link. Sushruta in ancient India, Etienne Lancereau in 19th century France, they linked sugar intake to diabetes centuries ago. Today, the association with sugar and high fructose corn syrup intake, especially from soft drinks, is just overwhelming in large population studies.
Okay, and what about something like high blood pressure? We usually think salt is the big culprit there. Is there a fructose connection too?
Yes, and this is fascinating. It appears it's not just the amount of salt you eat, it's more about whether that salt causes a rise in your blood salt concentration.
Ah, like getting dehydrated from salt.
Exactly. The body interprets that rise in concentration as dehydration. And guess what that triggers? That internal polyol pathway we talked about, the one that produces fructose inside your cells.
So eating too much salt or getting dehydrated can make your body produce its own fructose.
Yes, which then turns on the survival switch. And there's another hormone involved here, vasopressin, sometimes called a fat hormone because it helps us retain water, but also seems linked to fat storage. Fructose production directly stimulates vasopressin.
Oh, okay.
This helps explain why desert animals often carry extra fat. It's a source of metabolic water. And it might explain why many overweight people often have high vasopressin levels. It's all interconnected in this complex survival response.
This is really reframing how I think about these seemingly separate health issues. They might all be linked back to this switch. But what about our brains? How does this survival switch affect our mental well-being, our behavior?
That's another huge piece of the puzzle. Fructose intake seems to trigger aspects of what Dr. Johnson calls the foraging response.
foraging response.
Yeah, think about what an animal needs to do when food is scarce. It needs to explore, take risks, act impulsively maybe. So behaviors like impulsivity, novelty seeking, risk taking, and maybe even decreased willpower or focus on long-term goals.
Huh. Like your ancient brain is constantly on the hunt for scarce resources, even when they're everywhere.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it raises really important questions about conditions like ADHD. Some researchers now believe ADHD might actually be a kind of hyperactive foraging response, evolutionarily advantageous in the past, but mismatched now.
That's provocative.
Yeah.
Why didn't old studies find a link between sugar and hyperactivity then?
Well, many past studies didn't specifically measure fructose, or they didn't measure uric acid. They often used sucrose, which is half fructose, half glucose, or compared sugar to artificial sweeteners, which might have their own effects. It's complicated.
Okay. What else in the brain?
Consider bipolar disorder. The mania episodes often show significant overlap with these foraging-type behaviors: high energy, risk-taking, impulsivity. Bipolar disorder rates have also increased parallel to sugar intake over the decades. And studies have found high levels of uric acid, fructose, and sorbitol, part of that polyol pathway in the brains of patients with bipolar disorder.
Interesting.
Even lithium, a common treatment for bipolar, was originally used for gout back in the 19th century. That suggests a possible uric acid connection.
Wow. Okay. Any other behavioral links?
There are links emerging with aggression, too. High intake of soft drinks and sugar in childhood has been associated with violent behavior later in adulthood in some studies. And elevated uric acid itself has been linked with aggressive acts.
And finally, the big one. Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Is there a connection there?
This is a really active area of research, and the findings are quite startling. Alzheimer's brains show significantly elevated fructose levels, sometimes 4 to 6 times higher than healthy brains.
Fructose in the brain. How does it get there?
Much of it appears to be made in the brain via that same polyol pathway, especially if blood glucose levels are high. This fructose then seems to cause insulin resistance, specifically in the memory and decision-making regions of the brain. It essentially starves those neurons of energy, leading to dysfunction and eventually cell death.
So the fructose is driving the damage. What about the amyloid plaques and tau tangles we always hear about?
The current thinking in this model is that the amyloid and tau accumulation might actually be secondary responses. They could be part of the brain's reaction to the underlying metabolic stress and energy crisis caused by the fructose and insulin resistance.
So, to put it simply, our body's brilliant survival mechanism, designed for times of famine, is now constantly overactivated by our modern food environment and is having these profound, far-reaching effects on almost every system. Our metabolism, our blood pressure, even our brain function and behavior.
That's a good summary. It's a fundamental mismatch.
Okay. This is, frankly, a lot to process, and it sounds pretty dire in some ways. But the flip side is, if we understand the mechanism, it points us toward clear, actionable solutions, right?
Right.
So how do we use this knowledge to turn down the dimmer switch, as you called it, and reclaim our health?
Exactly. The good news is we do have options, and it's important to remember it is a dimmer switch, not a strict on-off. The degree of activation really depends on the amount and, importantly, the speed of fructose intake. So the goal is to stop chronically activating this pathway at high levels.
Okay, so dietary changes are obviously key. If you had to pick one or two non-negotiable changes, the absolute biggest nuggets for listeners to focus on first, what would they be?
Without a doubt, number one is eliminating sugary drinks entirely. Sodas, fruit juices, sweetened teas, sports drinks.
All of them, even fruit juice.
Especially fruit juice because it removes the fiber. These drinks are worse than solid sugar in some ways. They deliver a massive fructose load very quickly straight to the liver, hitting that switch hard and fast. That's the main message.
Okay, no sugary drinks. Got it. What's number two?
Tackle all added sugars, read labels, sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, agave, honey, maple syrup. It all contains fructose. The general guideline is to aim for less than 10% of your daily calories from added sugars. But ideally, the long-term goal should be less than 5%.
Less than 5%. Okay. And if someone must have something sugary?
Well, if you absolutely must say have a sugary drink, sip it very slowly, don't gulp it, and have it with food, preferably fiber-rich food, to try and blunt that rapid absorption and the fructose hit.
Okay, that's a fantastic, actionable starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Sugary drinks and added sugars. What about other key dietary considerations, things we might not immediately think of?
Right. Next up would be high glycemic carbohydrates. Things like white bread, white rice, potatoes, most breakfast cereals, chips.
Why those? They aren't fructose.
They aren't, but they rapidly convert to glucose in your bloodstream. High glucose can also stimulate that internal fructose production via the polyol pathway, especially if you're dehydrated or salt sensitive. So you want to emphasize whole grains instead, and low glycemic vegetables, think broccoli, asparagus, leafy greens, cucumbers, tomatoes, also beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds.
Okay, manage the quick carbs. What about fruit itself? We heard bears love it.
Yeah, fruit is tricky. It's nature's source of fructose bundled with fiber and nutrients. Enjoy fresh, whole fruits, but maybe limit to around 3 to 4 servings daily, spread out. Don't eat them all at once. For fruits that are particularly high in fructose, like grapes, mangoes, apples, maybe consider half servings. And definitely avoid dried fruits. And those concentrated fruit products, like fruit juice, all the sugar without the benefits of the whole fruit structure.
Got it. Whole fruit in moderation, avoid juices and dried food. What about protein?
For protein, the advice here is to limit red meat, organ meats, and shellfish to maybe twice a week or less.
Why limit those?
They are high in two things: umami, that savory taste.
Right, the fifth taste.
Yeah. And also compounds called purines. Both umami and purines can be converted to uric acid in the body.
Boosting the uric acid again.
Exactly, further activating that fat storage switch. So it's better to emphasize fish, poultry, dairy, and vegetable proteins like beans and tofu.
Okay. And fats. We heard fat was good for survival.
Yes, but the type of fat matters in our modern context. Emphasize monounsaturated fats, think olive oil, avocados, and omega-3 fatty acids found in fatty fish, walnuts, flaxseed. These types of fats can actually help block many of fructose's negative effects on metabolism. Avoid excessive saturated and trans fats.
Good fats are protective. Makes sense. What about salt? You mentioned the link to internal fructose production.
Right. Reducing overall salt intake is generally good advice. Aim for maybe 5-6 grams daily, which is about a teaspoon. Be especially mindful of hidden salt in processed foods, canned soups, fast foods. That's where most of it comes from. And if you do eat salty foods, make sure to drink plenty of water with them to counter that dehydration signal.
Drink water. How much?
General guideline: 6 to 8 glasses, about 8 ounces each daily. Staying well hydrated is key. It helps dilute blood salt concentration and generally counters the effects of salt on that internal fructose production.
Okay, hydration is crucial. Any foods or drinks that are particularly beneficial in countering the switch?
Yes, a few things. Coffee, surprisingly plain coffee without added sugar, contains compounds that can actually block uric acid formation.
Interesting.
Green tea is also great, full of beneficial flavonoids. And dark chocolate, we're talking 70% cocoa or higher, provides a compound called epicatechin, which seems to protect mitochondria.
Coffee, green tea, dark chocolate. Good news for some. What about alcohol?
Treat alcohol essentially like sugar in this context. It activates the survival switch, primarily by stimulating that internal fructose production, partly through causing dehydration. So reducing or eliminating alcohol is advisable. If you do drink, sip it slowly, alternate with water. Beer might be especially problematic because it often contains brewer's yeast, which is high in purines, contributing to uric acid.
Right, the uric acid again. And you mentioned vitamin C earlier.
Yes, since we can't make our own, and it helps counter some of the switch's effects, considering a daily supplement of maybe 500, 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C could be beneficial. It seems to help stimulate uric acid excretion and protect those vital mitochondria from oxidative stress.
Okay, that's a comprehensive look at diet. Diet is clearly huge here. But you also mentioned rebuilding our body's fundamental machinery, our mitochondria, those energy factories. How do we repair that damage and get our metabolism back on track, especially if someone's been overweight for a while?
That's a vital point because, yes, when you've been overweight for some time, your body can get kind of locked into that weight. It actively reduces metabolism and increases hunger when you try to lose weight. It fights back. This is thought to be largely due to mitochondrial damage or dysfunction from that chronic oxidative stress we talked about.
So, how do we fix the mitochondria?
2 key strategies emerge from the research. First, intermittent fasting. This mimics those natural periods of food scarcity our ancestors experienced. It seems to stimulate mitochondrial growth, a process called mitohormesis, while also reducing overall oxidative stress. There are many ways to do it. Find one that works for you.
Intermittent fasting. What's the second strategy?
Zone 2 exercise. This is really key for mitochondrial health.
Zone 2. What's that exactly?
It's basically moderate intensity endurance exercise. Think brisk walking, swimming, cycling. You do it for at least an hour, maybe 3-4 times a week. The intensity is crucial. It's where you can still hold a conversation, but you couldn't really sing comfortably, usually around 60–70% of your maximum heart rate.
Why that specific intensity?
That specific intensity seems to be optimal for stimulating mitochondrial growth and, importantly, improving their ability to burn fat efficiently. It helps your body become a better fat burner over time. An interesting aside, some researchers suggest you can even monitor your natural walking gait or speed over time as a simple, rough indicator of your mitochondrial health. Faster, more robust gait often correlates with healthier mitochondria.
Huh. Zone 2 exercise for the mitochondria, that's specific.
Yeah.
What about those people who seem to eat sugar with no problems? Are they just lucky or resistant?
Well, most people who seem sugar resistant probably aren't, not indefinitely. It's usually due to factors like limited prior fructose exposure, or maybe they just started out with healthier, more resilient mitochondria, perhaps due to genetics or lifestyle. But the evidence suggests that chronic high fructose exposure will eventually overwhelm the system and activate that switch in most people. It catches up.
Okay. And what if someone is dealing with really intense sugar cravings? Is there a way to block those?
Unfortunately, there's no reliable magic bullet to block cravings yet. These cravings are often driven by deep biological urges, that foraging response kicking in. Your best bet, really, is when the urge strikes hard, try to reach for a piece of whole fruit first. The fiber helps blunt the fructose impact compared to, say, candy or a soda. It might satisfy the urge with less damage.
Okay, so manage the environment, choose whole foods. Makes sense. Well, today we've taken a really deep dive into this revolutionary idea that fundamentally nature wants us to be fat. It really shifts the focus, doesn't it? It suggests it's not primarily about willpower. It's fundamentally about our biology and how it interacts with our modern environment.
Exactly. By understanding this survival switch, how our bodies are deeply wired to store fat in anticipation of scarcity, and how modern foods, particularly fructose, but also high glycemic carbs, salt, umami, alcohol, are constantly flipping this switch, we gain incredibly powerful insights into why we gain weight, why we struggle to lose it, and why we develop so many chronic diseases today.
It really feels like a detective story, peeling back all these layers of the mystery genetics, history, diet, disease to find this potential root cause. And this knowledge, it truly empowers us, doesn't it? It gives us tools to work with our bodies, not constantly fight against them to achieve lasting health and vitality.
Absolutely. So, as you go about your day, maybe consider this. In this world of truly unprecedented abundance, what signals are you actually sending your ancient biological machinery? Are you constantly, inadvertently ringing the alarm bell for a winter that never actually arrives? Understanding this, asking that question, is perhaps the most crucial first step to truly resetting your health and moving towards a future where your biology works for you, not against you.